trust that there is a power for good, a higher power, our higher selves. Knowing that, trusting that, and staying in that faith that all is well, no matter what the appearance might be, no matter what the circumstance is, still staying centered in that knowing, connecting with that inner divinity. All is well. All is well. Even if it might be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, just going back to it, it will guide us into such fulfillment. And Ernest Holmes writes in his Science of Mind, true prayer must be, thy will be done. But the implication, he writes, relative to the will of God in this prayer is not a submission to the inevitability of evil or limitation. It is the knowledge that the will of God is always good. And that, my friends, is a deep and powerful spiritual truth. The will of God is always good. If we were taught something else, now we can set the intention to embrace a different concept. The will of God is for us. This loving Creator is filled with love, as Patty said, filled with love for us. That is the truth. That is the real truth. And let us be very clear about something right now, is that in this teaching, we do not believe that this God that exists as this man somewhere up there with a gold capital G on his chest that is going to give us what we want if we plead and implore. We beg for the good of God. Please, dear God, I won't do this anymore. I'll be really good. Remember, I'll be a really good girl if you just let this happen, God. You know? And it doesn't quite work that way, because that universal law that we spoke of is going to give us more of that discomfort. So just knowing that this is a presence that is for us, that loves us, the good of God, the love of God, that is the truth. That feels so much better than begging for something to take place. Just knowing that if I'm a child of God, this good must take place by right of my divinity, my own birthright. So what we are surrendering to and what we're letting go, what we're releasing to, is the higher dimension of ourselves that is greater than the ourselves that we know. It's so much larger than what we think with these small minds. It is the greater, higher self. And it's each and every one of us has a higher self. And it's all connected in this oneness of God's loving energy. So let me say that again, because this is the key to this morning's lesson, is when we surrender to the will of God, the will of good, we are surrendering to a higher dimension of ourselves. The great I am, the creative force that creates all that is, was, and ever shall be. Reverend Dr. Michael Beckwith says it this way: when we surrender to the will of God, we are surrendering to the next stage of our evolution. How cool is that? Remembering to stay connected all times. Stay connected, because there is something so much greater than our human selves that is taking place within each of our lives. Since the presence of God is infinite, and since we are really expressions of this one life in manifestations, we are God's manifestations. That's what we are. Our experiences are our manifestations, because we're microcosms of that great I am. So we are manifestations of the one intelligence. So as we allow this truth to express through us, when we get out of our own way and surrender, release, that's what we're surrendering to, a greater good, not something that's frightening and scary. Actually, I guess if my highest self, if I was more aware, my highest self would be looking down and saying, well, that human experience looks pretty scary and frightening, you know. This is so much better here. This is where the peace is. This is where the flow of life is. And it flows, it ebbs and tides. It's beautiful. It's the flow of life. Since the presence of God is infinite, so then to let God become more conscious of itself as us, to let love express more of itself as us, to let abundance reveal more of itself as us, to let the wholeness make known to us more of itself. This is what we receive when we release attachments to the outcome. And Carolyn May says in her book, Entering the Castle, your soul tells you everything is in the hands of a force greater than what you perceive in the present moment. Let go. Do not let the illusion of the moment seduce you into a misperception. Let it go. Other guidance is at work that you cannot see or hear. You are not alone. Let it go. Surrender. And this is what Jesus did in the garden after he prayed not once, not twice, but 3 times. He surrendered. He surrendered to the will of the divine. His higher self. This was the truth of his being, which is the truth of each and every one of our beings. We each have a higher self. He trusted that the will of God, or the divine perfection of who he was, would prevail, and that life itself would triumph even over the appearance of death. Because the death is the physical body, our vessels that get our spiritual self through this experience. Remember, we are not our bodies. We believe most of the time that we are our bodies. But we are so much more than our bodies. The bodies will die, but that so much more is eternal. It goes on forever and ever and ever. And Ernest Holmes talks about the will of God in Science of Mind. He writes, the will of God cannot be death. Why? Because if we assume God to be the principle of life cannot produce death without destroying itself. The will of life has only to be life. There can be no death in God. How can there be death in God? It's eternal life. It would destroy itself. God's will cannot be death. The spirit of life cannot know death. It doesn't even know it. We're having experiences in these human forms that we should honor these human forms and take care of these beautiful vessels as they get us through this human experience that we are having, so that that divinity can keep continuously expanding itself. So people do leave their bodies behind. Yes, that's true. Does that mean they are dead to the God of all life? Of course not. Jesus decided to trust even beyond the physical death. He knew there was something more than just his body. He knew that the Father and I are one. He had this degree of great trust that we can all develop the more that we practice this teaching. And this is a specific teaching of oneness, of eternality that we talk about here. This is the science of mind, and these principles, we believe, are infallible. They're scientific. What would it take for us to surrender our smaller thinking mind to that of our higher self, the divine knower within? You have a divine knower within each and every one of us. Makes me feel good. Sometimes I just don't know. Think I know. But there's something so much greater that really knows. And to surrender to that. We can claim, thy will be done. And then rest in assurance that all is well. We can, as we begin to really trust and have faith in this will of a higher power, that this will is for good, and only good. As Holmes says, the will of God is always toward that which expresses life and happiness. Isn't that beautiful? Love that. I surrender who I am, what I think, what I think I know, my hopes, my desires, my dreams, my doubts. I surrender everything to this will, to this higher will, because it will outpicture anything that I can imagine. So always set an intention, but that caveat, this or something better. This or something better, because there's always something better. That's where the trust and the faith comes in. That's the surrender. It's not frightening. It's gentle. It's beautiful. It's loving. It's connecting with divinity. That's what we're doing. We are consciously connecting with a power for good. And I'd like to know, are you willing to do this morning? Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm going to have to really get powerful if you don't all just wake up now. I know it's a Sunday morning. I'm holding back. So in a few moments, we're going to have a blessing ceremony. And during that ceremony, I want you to contemplate surrendering your will to God's will, the will of good, the will of your higher self, so that you too can move to the next stage of your evolution. You know that we're always evolving. You do know this, right?
Yep.
We're not just here, one-dimensional beings, never even. We are forever evolving. Set your intention, how you want to evolve, what you want to evolve into. Set that intention. So during the rose blessing, I ask you to allow the idea of thy will be done be the ultimate act in your evolution of your soul. If you are willing to do this, you will be very, very blessed by God's amazing grace. There's a song in there somewhere. The rose itself symbolizes in ceremony our recognition that the human is immersed in the divine, that we are all truly one in God, and that we live in this all-embracing circle of divine love. So the rose ultimately, this morning, it is representing divine love in our ceremony. And we recognize that each one of you comes forth from God, that each one of you is a divine creation, and that this wholeness is at the core, the very center of your being. Whether you recognize it or not, it is there. It is there. Because each one has been made in the image of God. We're all made in the image of God. So that means that at the very core, the very essence of who we really are, we're perfect, we're whole, we're complete. Because God is. And we are expressions, creations of this God. And so, this moment is a defining moment for each of you in this morning, in this ceremony, as you pledge to allow your inner light to shine brighter, more radiantly. Hold that, releasing your will to the divine will as we do the ceremony. And in this public moment, yet within the privacy of your own hearts, I invite you to now commit to yourself and to God that you will no longer allow fear, doubt, resentment, unforgiveness to fill your heart, to fill your mind. Let go of all fears of lack or limitation. They can't control you when you're in the sphere, when you're in the energy of God's healing love. And that's what the rose is symbolizing this morning. From this moment forward, I invite you to commit to allowing God to express itself through you. I allow God to express through me. Even in those moments when we feel darkness, where we feel pain, I surrender my will to God's will and allow it to express through me. By making this choice, you are aligning yourself with that divine peace, with the fulfillment, with the happiness, and with abundance. So will you all do this to the best of your ability? You answer, yes. I will.
Yes.
So Ernest Holmes, in this thing called You, real short, he writes, "The spirit within me makes all things new. Every negative thought or condition is now erased from my experience. I am aware of my union with good. I am conscious of my oneness with life. I expect more prosperity, more happiness, more harmony than ever before. I walk in the joy of ever-increasing good. And so, in this moment, Reverend Jessica, the practitioners, and I will individually bless each one who desires it by dipping a rose into our little bowls of water there. The water symbolizes the flow of life. That is what the cleanliness, the clarity of life, the infinite flow, the wisdom that is flowing through you. The rose is always a symbol of love, will be a symbol of divine love. And that is also guiding you. So I would like to ask our practitioners to come forward. Usher Bill.
Usher Bill.
Practitioner Usher Bill.